I pressed record before I came up with a bit, which is a problem because now I'm vamping and nothing's coming to mind.
Not exactly an explosive start.
Son of a bitch. Yeah, that'll do. All right, so this is the other Barbie Hyman. Wait, no,
Timer.
so much worse.
We don't have genitals.
I I genuinely did not mean to say that. Oops.
Barbieheimer.
Barbenheimer. I can't fucking say it. Whatever. Oppenheimer. We saw Oppenheimer. Um,
Barbenheimer. Oppen Barbie.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, Oppenheimer, which is the latest Christopher Nolan film, about the aforementioned Oppenheimer, played by Cillian Murphy, which is a 3 hour movie that I accidentally missed like the first 10 minutes of, because I did not know they were not playing trailers before this movie started. So I walked in late. That being
Um,
said, a quick
they
Google search cut me up, and I didn't. And it turns out I didn't really miss anything important because it's only referenced like 2 or 3 times for the entire film. Um,
they were playing trailers in my screening, which my partner and I missed most of the trailers, so it worked out.
yeah, I think my mind just started right away. Surprising because I didn't even see the 70 millimeter version, which I heard didn't have trailers. I saw like on Dolby.
Oh,
Um, and for so I don't know. Either way, I missed the whole Apple thing. Um, I had to go back and like Google it quick, like sneakily on my phone. I was like, "What the hell happened? Did I miss?" Oh, okay.
he
Uh,
actually did do that. That is accurate.
it's actually not. The book this movie's based on says that happened. The family disputes it. I Googled.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
it's really kind of it's he said she said. We don't actually know.
Yes,
Um,
fair enough.
so I'm going to preface this by saying that I think this is a very well made film. It has the classical features of a Nolan film, which is very stuffed. The cinematography is very good. The practical effects are very, very good. All the performances are fantastic. Um,
I hear a
all,
butt coming.
there is a butt coming. But I didn't really like it.
Proceed.
First off, did you like it? I want to.
Yes, proceed.
Okay. Um, and I have to, I get for one, I've kind of started falling off the Nolan hype train, or the last decade or so. I feel like Dunkirk was the last movie he made that I really liked. I didn't like Tenet. Um,
I haven't seen Tenet.
and this one feels like it follows a lot of the same issues that I already was getting sick of in Nolan films, and this just kind of feels like 3 hours of it, which is it is about there's not a lot of when you actually break it down, there's not a lot of character work in this film. And let me explain why. Like outside of Cillian Murphy, obviously, who like takes the most screen time, the most close ups, it's much more concerned about the political theater, especially in the third act, than it is about the people behind it. Most of the other characters outside of Oppenheimer, maybe Robert Downey Jr.'s character, are pretty one note. The women are written as shrill and unlikable, and deliberately like at opposition with Oppenheimer. Most of the other characters outside of like maybe Matt Damon's character are also pretty one note. There's just not a lot to these characters, and the movie doesn't really have much interest in exploring them beyond their most basic plot structure and like plot necessity. Um, and as I'll say, it's badly written because it's still a sharp script, but every scene kind of has like it has a utilitarian purpose, and that's it. There's very little space for the room to breathe for the first 2 hours. There's very much like this happens and this happens and this happens. Um, and I'm partially stealing this opinion from a friend of mine who also loves the movie, and I kind of share their opinion about it. Not as much as they do, but like I do agree that I feel like when you actually break it down past the technical spectacle, all that stuff, doesn't feel like it focuses on the right thing to me. I want to make that clear.
What the is the quote unquote right thing that you were looking for?
In the third act of the film, the movie, I feel like it starts to lean that direction where it's about, and I don't feel I'm getting any spoilers over here. It's based on history. You know what happens. Um, and I where it's supposed it starts to lean into, okay, Oppenheimer is starting to feel regret and remorse over creating the most deadly weapon in all of human history. And there's some great imagery and character moments of him kind of facing that reality, but all of it is kind of more like it's still there, but it's not nearly focused on. It's instead about two old men going to war with each other over their reputation. With some scenes with Robert Downey Jr.'s character, it's about him trying to get elected to a position in cabinet. Um, that he deliberately sabotaged Oppenheimer and ruined his reputation. Out of perceived spite. And I looked it up. That is largely true. That is largely what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I will give this movie credit for. That is like of the biopics of this nature, this one's one of the more accurate ones. Um, so now, granted, I'm not saying my opinion is right. This is more just I just not what I found interesting. It's not what I find interesting in the movie. I don't really have much interest in political theater. So the fact that a lot of the third act is dedicated to that, and it's about, again, the crux of the film and the climax of the film is Oppenheimer eventually finding redemption in the eyes of the public. It's not about him reconciling with his own guilt and shame. It's about that people forgive him for creating the bomb, which is then they say explicitly in the film. But it doesn't really do much to reconcile with the actual emotions behind his actions, which I thought would be like a more interesting interpretation of the character. So it's not saying what's there is bad. It's not even saying like you're bad if you like this or that it's a bad movie overall. But from what I look for in a movie, this wasn't it for me. Your thoughts?
I'm kind of not an I see your points, but I'm kind of the opposite.
Okay.
I love history,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm fascinated by it, and I thought the cinematography and the editing choices and the visual tricks were extremely effective and
Mm-hmm.
clever.
Yeah.
I I almost didn't notice that it was a 3 hour film because I was so riveted. It is a very intense, very thrilling film, in my opinion. It's as somebody who was raised by lawyers, I do appreciate and recognize the inherent drama of basically a verbal action film, which
Mm-hmm.
this is at parts.
Okay.
Uh, I I liked us seeing the contrast between uh, the present, um, uh, which is from Strauss's point of view, the black and white,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 the past, predominantly, which is from Oppenheimer's point of view in color. And if you noticed, you may have missed it. In the beginning, each of those is labeled fission and fusion.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I thought that was clever. I was completely sucked into it.
Mm-hmm.
I my my date had to remind me that nobody died in during the Trinity test because I was practically on the edge of my seat. It was so intense, and I
Mm-hmm.
mean that in the best possible way.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I thought all the performances were fantastic. I think this is the best I've seen Matt Damon be since The Martian.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I I was also blown away by RDJ and Killian Murphy, of course. I I found it all very enthralling and fascinating and interesting, and I would recommend it. From what you described, it sounds like you were looking or hoping for a different kind of film.
It's not that I was like, looking for, I guess in a way I kind of was, but it's more like I didn't go in expecting a different movie. It's just more like what I got didn't intrigue me. Um, and I don't agree.
And it
I don't even disagree with
and
anything you
it
said. To be clear,
it did intrigue me because history is one of my favorite subjects.
sure. And I think there's a way to do a biopic about history without sacrificing character. And I think this movie sacrifices a lot of character in favor of spectacle and political theater. That's
I
what's
do I do agree with your point that the the female characters, Florence Pugh's character and Emily Blunt's character, um, don't have the opportunity to display much depth. And granted, they're not the focus of the story. They're kind of going back to our last review, more accessories to the main character's story, uh, J. Robert Oppenheimer.
mm-hmm. But I think in there lies the problem because it's not just those two characters. Most of the characters fall into that camp of just being accessories. Not a lot of like again, with the exception of maybe Matt Damon, I would give like they give him a little depth. And I like what they. I do agree that again, all the objective points you made in this film, I agree with you. Like I think the cinematography is gorgeous. I think the script is like I think the script is sharp. I think the performances are great.
Practical
Um,
effects too.
that like I said, the practical effects are it's Christopher Nolan. He does great practical effects. But I think it does suffer from the same problem that a lot of Christopher Nolan movies suffer from, where it's story over characters. And this is not new to this movie. Tenet has this problem. Even like the Dark Knight trilogy has this problem. Interstellar did a little better, but it still has this problem. The only one I would say that does not have this problem is Dunkirk. But that's also because Dunkirk, I feel like, is almost a direct rebuttal against Christopher Nolan criticisms.
And
uh,
also Dunkirk, at least for like the first half hour, is almost a silent movie.
exactly.
Uh, there's it's an ensemble piece. It's a war story where you see a battle from three different perspectives using a bunch of different characters, none of whom really talk much or get an abundance of development.
Well, that's my point. Because a lot of criticisms that was thrown at Nolan are that he does more telling than showing. A lot of times he relies way too much on dialogue and exposition to tell a story. They're often like over the long, not really emotionally driven. They're more driven by plot than character motivation, and that's why Dunkirk felt like a rebuttal to that because it is largely silent. There's not a lot of dialogue in it, and is largely driven by emotion, the experience of being in the experience and the tension of being in the war at that time.
Yes.
And it's a relatively simple story. It doesn't need a lot to explain to get to the point across. So that's my point there. But like Interstellar has the same problem where it's like I enjoyed it when I first saw it, but in hindsight, like there's some parts have not aged well. Particularly again going back to Anna Hathaway's motivation then turns into a guy towards the third act of the film, kind of inexplicably out of nowhere. Um, which oddly enough is also the problem with the Anne Hathaway movie character in Dark Knight Rises. But the point I'm trying to make here is the fact that when you boil it down, Chris Nolan isn't really great at writing complex characters. Again, a lot of what sells Oppenheimer as a character is Cillian Murphy's performance, which is undeniably Oscar worthy.
Yes.
That is not in dispute. And I think one of the most effective scenes in the film, this goes into spoiler territory slightly, is right after they detonate the bomb in Hiroshima, and he gives that speech in the podium where he starts to imagine everyone else around him start to fade away into dust based on the weapon he deployed. Very effective scene, very well shot, doesn't require a lot of dialogue, very atmospheric. I wanted more of that. That's kind of like, and that's where I feel like it kind of loses step because it kind of loses that focus of being about the consequences of the bomb and turns into a court drama about him trying to maintain his reputation. And to me, like sacrifice, like just focusing on older men's reputation in the public eye does not interest me as much as a man grappling with his grief and his guilt over what he's done. It's only hinted at in various scenes, but it's not the focus. And I feel like it should have been, especially about a story about the nuclear bomb, which undeniably had mass effect then, and we're still feeling the effects of today. That to me is like it is accurate historically to the events that actually happened, but does it really do the topic justice? That's kind of what I'm more thinking of.
That's a valid perspective. I haven't seen all of Christopher Nolan's uh films. I've seen the Dark Knight trilogy, I've seen Interstellar, I've seen Dunkirk, and I've seen this.
Mhm.
And maybe my perspective will change in time, but as of now, I I think overall that this is a masterful piece of
Mhm.
film.
Sure. And like, let me be clear what I'm not saying, because I want to make that clear. I'm not saying you're bad if you like this. I'm not saying you're wrong if you like this. I'm not. You're not wrong if you like have the perspective you have, which is like this is done very masterfully, and it is a good technical piece of filmmaking. That is a valid perspective. I'm not saying you're wrong if you feel that way. I think more what I'm trying to say here is more like this is an important topic. This is an important
Yes.
historical figure. This is a very and like this is something that we're still feeling the effects of over 60 years later, like 80 years later. Um, and I get and while there's various references, like the movie ends with spoiler, with Oppenheimer kind of saying like, yeah, I think we kind of fucked over the world. I'm paraphrasing, obviously.
Hmm.
Uh, but but it's more like, yeah, but the theme of that isn't really explored all that much. It's hinted at in various parts, and there's certainly allusions to it, but it's more of Oppenheimer trying to clear his own name. It's more of like Strauss trying to clear his own name, and then going and like at the various points, it makes it very explicitly clear the entire third act of the film is about these two going at each other over a perceived slight years ago. Uh,
Which, spoiler alert, wasn't even a slight.
Although it's perceived as one. And then again, historically, as far as I can tell, this is accurate. This is more or less what happened. Because I thought that might have made it for the film. It wasn't. He was really that petty in real life.
Hmm.
So like, and I just even the stuff with the president where he says like, "Don't let that crybaby back in here." That didn't happen in that way, but something to that extent did actually happen in real life.
Yes.
Um, and it's more just like I feel like if you're gonna make a movie about the creation of the nuclear bomb and tackle the implications that that creation has, there should be more exploration to the moral and ethical implications of it, and it's kind of glanced over, um, in favor of again talking about two older men's reputation in the public eye.
Maybe a possible interpretation could be that uh, those moral implications and the different perspectives on it is sort of this underlying plain subtext that links these two contentious political figures.
Like it does connect in specifically in the development of the atomic bomb, or the hydrogen bomb. Like that part, that is true. That's a valid point. I would counter that with though that's not what drives the motivations and the plot towards the final act of the film. That's not what drives these characters. Oppenheimer's motivation is not to absolve his guilt from the bomb, from making the bomb. His motivation for the final act is to, I take that back a little bit. I take it back a little bit. Because there was like, it's to have the public see him in a better light over the creation of the bomb. That's the emotional catharsis in the final act when he's given the medal.
Yes.
Uh, like the emotional catharsis isn't that he's overcome his own guilt and grief over creation of the bomb. The emotional catharsis is that he's still recognized as a great man. While Strauss is recognized as a bad man. That's the emotional catharsis. That's the climax of the film, is when that comes about. And while it's not bad to like that angle, for me, it feels like it takes away a lot of emotional complexity behind it,
That's
in
fair.
in favor of again political theory and story. And that's where the point I'm trying to get at here, and because this is something that Nolan has struggled with over the last couple decades, is plot over character. And it's not bad if you like plot. The plot is still good as is.
Yes.
And like the script definitely favors it as is. I just wish it wasn't so utilitarian.
That's fair. And I feel like that kind of more uh, nuanced and detailed character depth and exploration could almost sort of be a companion piece to this.
If they were to
Uh,
do that, I would watch it. Like, I'd be very curious. Like, I think there's plenty of material to do that with.
Absolutely.
Because even like some of the big beats that are supposed to like haunt him for the rest of his life are not really talked about all that much. Like Florence Pugh's character, for example. Spoiler alert. Like kills herself or maybe doesn't. Like in the middle of the film, and he's caught grieving her when his wife finds when the wife finds him, but she very quickly brushes like kind of I don't want to say brush it aside, but it's never really mentioned again after that point. They allude to it once or twice. Um, but they never
Including
really
in
take
the hearing.
yeah, like they allude to it like once or twice in the hearing, but they never really explore the bigger impact of it. It's more like it happens, he grieves, they move on. The scene serves its purpose. We're not going to explore it. We're not going to let it breathe. We're just going to move on to the next scene. And if you watch the movie again, the first 2 hours does this a lot. There's really not a lot of room for scenes to breathe. It's very much boom, 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 next scene, boom, 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 next scene, boom, 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 next scene.
That's fair.
And like characters aren't allowed to breathe. They're not allowed to absorb what's happening. They're not allowed to. The audience isn't really allowed to absorb what's being said and done because we have to hurry to the next scene. Until the atomic bomb happened, like until the bomb test happens. That's like the first real scene where the audience is allowed to breathe with it a bit more and absorb the
The
impact of it, which is why it's probably the most effective scenes of the film.
the Trinity test
The
of
Trinity test, yeah,
of the atomic bomb.
because that scene takes its time. It wants you to feel the impact. It wants you to feel the weight of it. Like,
You definitely do.
and you definitely do because it takes its time with it. It lets you absorb it. It lets you take in the feeling and the impact of it. That's why the other most effective scene is the scene where he's giving the speech and everyone starts fading away. It's a slow, methodical scene that builds up to a really like disturbing climax. And you are allowed to breathe with it. You're not in a rush to get to the next scene. Do you see what I'm getting at here? And I'm not saying even I'm right. These are just things I noticed while I was watching the film.
I see, and your your thoughts are valid, and my thoughts are valid.
Yeah,
I I understand what you're saying that and yes, it are the um is it a little overstuffed and simultaneously character wise underdeveloped? Yes, yes, but there is a lot to cover.
sure.
And it is a very intense and thrilling movie. And and maybe the verbal action scenes didn't do it for you as much as me. Like I said, I was raised by lawyers, so who
Fair enough.
argued who argued a lot. So
Fair enough.
that struck a chord with me. Uh, as that I think depending on what you're looking for
Mhm.
and and what you are predisposed or inclined to, you can still get something significant and meaningful out of viewing this movie.
For sure. And it again, it both factors like I recognize that I'm in the minority here. I know a lot of people are gonna watch this, and I'm sure I'm gonna see one in the comments. That are just like that love this movie, got a lot out of this movie, and my thing is like if you did this movie spoke to you in a certain way, all the power to you. Like
I mean, I haven't seen Inception and I haven't seen Memento or Insomnia. I haven't seen Tenet,
I
but
haven't seen his older works. I haven't seen Memento or Inception. Inception has the same fucking problem.
but
Uh,
of of the Nolan films that I've seen, I'd say either this or Dunkirk are his masterworks
I think
thus far.
Dunkirk's one of his best films. That's also because there's a lot of restraint in Dunkirk. Um, Inception, like, and here's the thing: I used to be a big Nolan stan. Like I was in love with Inception when I first saw it. But that kind of goes back to the more I've seen his work, the more I start recognizing the patterns, and all that kind of
Well,
stuff.
that's what auteurs do.
Yeah,
They have a distinct voice.
true. But it's more like, does that voice mature with time and age and experience? Um, does it learn from the past mistakes? Is the voice that they're projecting more interesting enough to make to what's I'm looking for to make up for their shortcomings? Because every voice has a shortcoming. Like Tarantino is a good example of this because, like, say what you will about Tarantino, love him, hate him, he also has a very distinct voice. And he also has a lot of flaws with that voice. But you can make the argument that if you're like, one, he has grown as a filmmaker over the years,
Yes.
and two, while his voice hasn't changed all that much, you can make the argument the focus is strong enough where it needs to be that it can make up for his shortcomings. And you can make the argument for Oppenheimer as well that this is also the case. Um, but I think it's more like it hasn't grown and matured in a way that appeals to me personally. And that's just that's what it is. That's also how I've evolved as a film goer. And as a critic and someone who absorbs movies. And my own taste and understanding of things have changed. And retrospect, I look at Inception and go like, okay, it is a creative movie. It's also kind of a fucking mess. When you actually look into the broad strokes. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means you can recognize the flaws more. When you start recognizing those patterns, it's easier to see in other filmmakers' other projects. Whether or not that either that enhances your enjoyment or kills it is up to you.
I I do think, speaking for myself as a uh, film goer, my um, taste is starting to expand more into to quieter, more intimate stories
Mm-hmm.
that are more character driven. Like I the so far, even though I've only seen it once, it came and went out of my theater quickly. So far, my favorite film of the year is Past Lives, which is a Korean film, and is absolutely stunning.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, is it big and bombastic and long, like a lot of more mainstream films? No.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think there is a place for all kinds in a regular film goer's cinematic menu, so to speak.
Um, yeah, no, I mean, like, that's fine. Tastes evolve. Filmmakers evolve. And I don't really know where I land as far as my taste goes. Like, I don't think I have one general voice. It's more like for me, character work has always been more important than story. I can forgive a weak story that has good characters. So, this is something I mentioned on the show before. So, if you're a frequent watcher of the show, this should not be a revelation to you. But and I think I said the same thing when we reviewed Tenet, which is like, if I don't give a shit about the characters, I'm not gonna give a shit what happens to them. And Nolan has this tendency of kind of neglecting his characters, or putting the most stock roles possible. And with a few exceptions, most kind of fill a one note role in this film. And if that doesn't kill it for you, that's fine. Totally valid if you like everything else about it, because there is a lot to like here.
Yes.
So this is really just a matter of taste and how my tastes have evolved since I was a big Nolan fanboy. So yeah, um, I think it's probably as a nuanced discussion we can have about this.
Well, I suspected that might be the case when I heard the butt coming.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Like, I wanted to come out and sing this movie's praises, and it's also like gush and see what everyone else saw in this movie and love it to death. I didn't go into this movie just wanting to hate it, but I also grew into just kind of weary of Nolan's style, and I do that does inform the opinion a little bit, and that's unavoidable.
It
Um,
doesn't sound like you hate it, just that you didn't care for it as much as you had hoped to.
I was underwhelmed based on what I've heard about going into it, and now I'm gonna have to deal with the ramifications of not being 100% on board with it. So,
I
uh,
It is very intense. I am glad that um, uh, my partner and I saw this and then got lunch and then saw Barbie as the mental palate cleanser. Both are surprisingly philosophical films, so they do complement each other about as a double feature because they're both philosophical about societal issues that we are still feeling ramifications of.
Absolutely. And I think I would have preferred a closer examination and a critical eye on the ethical and moral implications of it than we got.
I don't think that's what the story was meant to be.
But it should have been, especially about the nuclear bomb. That's kind of what this all boils down to for me. It's kind of like talking about the Holocaust and then focusing on like Schindler's reputation after the fact. It's more like, okay, yeah, you can make it that way. It's not necessarily a bad route to take, but is it really the part that matters? Um, is the
Point
part that we
taken.
should actually care about? Like, it's like I don't really give a shit about Strauss and his reputation. He's just another old politician. Who gives a fuck? Um,
Well, he cared about his reputation.
well, of course he did. Mm.
So it depends on which character you empathize with more. And
Um,
and at least for me, over the course of the movie, the perspective would change. Okay, Oppenheimer is being a pompous jackass. Maybe he's not so sympathetic. Oh, but he is thinking about more ramifications than he is leading others to believe. Now
mhm,
now now Strauss is acting like an entitled asshole, but he's misinterpreting things and taking things personally. Which person is acting less like an asshole in which moment? It kind of flip flops.
mhm. Sure. But again, that's not really my like. That's not the point I'm trying to make here, though. Like, yeah, that's what we got. That's the structure of the film.
Yes,
That's the push and pull of the film. But it's more like, and again, I'm trying not to judge it based on the movie I wanted versus the movie we got. I'm trying to be as balanced as I can on the subject. Because I don't think judging it on a movie that I wanted it to be is necessarily fair.
yes.
Um, that being said, if it leaned more into the parts where he is trying to push back against further weapons development, if he's about his own, like talks to the president about his guilt, about his talks with Einstein about his guilt, where it focused more on the fact that he created the deadliest weapon in human history, objectively, in a way that, again, we're still feeling the effects of. And it feels more interested in salvaging his reputation than actually dealing with the ramifications of that outside of Cliff Notes. And the movie just doesn't. And I don't know if it's necessarily that the movie wanted to invest in other things, or maybe it didn't want to think too critically on the subject because it is a complicated subject.
It is a complicated subject with a variety of influences, and I know this is going to sound contrary, considering it is an overtly political film. Uh, Maybe it was trying to walk some kind of tightrope and not be overly political one way or another by not diving deeply in into those issues.
But it should be, especially about the nuclear bomb. And then like that's really the crux of the matter for me. Is the fact like it like it wants to talk about it, but doesn't want to be too critical about it.
Yes.
Because it frequently just like it provides a justification that probably was used in the real event, which is like if we don't make it, someone else will. And even points out numerous times that by the time he actually did use it, it looks like they were already going to surrender. Or at least like they were already losing, even though like they probably wouldn't have surrendered. I don't know who actually knows at this point. It doesn't matter.
that
Um,
that that kind of goes into historical fiction and historical theory.
exactly. So that's definitely the case. If we don't have a solid answer on that, to my knowledge, I should say, I'm not a historian. Uh, but it's more like, but at the same time, it uses those justifications and brings them up in historical context for which I'm sure they brought up, but it never actively challenges them. It never really pushes back that much against those notions, especially after the bomb is used. It's referenced, and he does sort like bring them up as a almost internal conflict on his own feelings about it. But that's kind of where it stops. It never really goes in too much into detail whether or not the use of the bomb was actually justified or whether it's not. And again, it goes back to does Oppenheimer is Oppenheimer a communist, and does he get to keep his security clearance? And it just kind of sidesteps that ethical debate. But we should
Uh,
be having that ethical debate because it is an important part of our history too.
yes,
A big important part of history that I've learned from studying it in my own time is that we need to challenge ourselves with the notion of our own history and not be afraid to question the things that are pretty iffy because American history is full of them.
oh yeah.
And that's pointed extremely mildly. So I'm not gonna say it's reckless or anything like that. I'm not gonna go that far, but I do feel like it's a missed opportunity to not explore that question further.
Sounds like you need to get with somebody and write a script.
Maybe I don't know. So I think it's all I really have to say on the matter. I don't want to go into too much too many tangents. I've already feel like I've said my piece. But on the
Feel
film
better?
itself, I don't want to take away from your enjoyment of the film more than I already have. So, is there anything in particular you wanted to highlight, or anything especially you want to talk about it that you liked or loved about the film?
The film score for one thing, especially during the Trinity scene, the Trinity test scene. Uh, if that was scored in any other way other than with those haunting strings,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't have had the same impact on me. So,
Mm-hmm.
very riveting score. I appreciated the use of practical effects, even in the explosions.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, um, you may not have gotten it, but I appreciated the character choices or characterization in the performances.
Mm-hmm.
This is a stacked cast from top to bottom.
Yeah,
Uh,
that makes my issues of characters, not the acting. It's or the acting choices. It's just the writing. Anyone continue.
so I could definitely see Robert Downey Jr. and hopefully Matt Damon both getting supporting actor nominations for this because they are both fantastic in it.
Mm-hmm.
And Cillian Murphy all but carries the film.
I'll be shocked if Killing Murphy didn't get nominated for this.
Yes. Now she she may not have had much scripted material to work with in terms of depth of character, but I thought Emily Blunt's performance choices were also very effective.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, she plays his wife. Um, I enjoyed being transported to different time periods and seeing a more in-depth point of view on a controversial and darker and scary piece of our history that at least in my high school history class was mentioned, but the larger details and implications were not discussed very heavily.
Yeah,
And
most history classes, unfortunately.
and I did there's one small scene when the like war secretary it is looking over the list of of, of targets in Japan,
Mm-hmm.
and he crosses off Tokyo because he and his wife honeymoon there, and oh, it's a terrific city. So we're not going to bomb that, but we can bomb these other cities. I was just so icky.
That one was made up. It may have been based on something that happened, but I think that one, as far as we know, I should say, was made up for the film.
just that whole detached mentality of this not affecting Tokyo. I mean, Japan is a pretty small country, geographically speaking,
Yeah.
and yes, they do have a long-standing history of not surrendering, of choosing death over surrendering. But and I guess when you're dealing with the larger political schemes, you it you have to have some form of detachment. But yeah, that one fleeting scene really struck me as pretty gross.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh, uh, so if that's what Nolan was going for, effective.
I would assume so.
um, like I mentioned earlier, the visual tricks of seeing and feeling Oppenheimer's guilt uh, through the irradiating lights, and his the externalization of his internal feelings about the atomic bomb. I thought that was effective storytelling.
Hmm.
So, there, in my opinion, there is a lot to like about this movie, and I do like it. I think it's a masterwork.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I understand and agree with many of your points. I just didn't go into this looking for a character study. I went into it looking more for a historical spectacle.
Hmm. That's fair. And like again, I don't want to take away from that enjoyment. And I respect and I think your opinion is valid. So I think it's more like from a character that's named after the person in question. I feel like it should be a character study. Um, and I now, granted, it's also worth noting on top of everything I've already said that I'm also much more critical of like historical pieces than I used to be. Because I understand a lot more about history now. That doesn't mean I'm smarter or more into educating a lot of people on the subject. That's not what I'm trying to say. Just more like in my own independent study of history, I've come to different understanding that has influenced my opinion on historical biopics. Um, so I look at it with a much more critical eye, and I'm much more picky about like what's being talked about, how it's being perceived, and how it's being represented. Because I do feel like all that's very important. So that's
Yeah,
where a lot of my opinions are coming from.
fair enough.
Yeah. So, cool. So I think it's getting pretty late. So I think we're gonna wrap up there. So I hope you guys got something out of this. Well, I think it's been a very interesting discussion.
I
Um,
think so too.
yeah. So, I'm just gonna catch up on the bunch of other movies that I've seen lately. I still have to talk about Haunted Mansion. Yeah, you know you're all waiting for that fucking review. Uh,
I'm gonna pass on that one.
that's fine. I already saw it. I'm not expecting you to see it too. Uh, so, in the meantime, thank you all for watching. See you later.